I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar. It is from HCSSS. Our two presenters today will be talking about Transform Your Telematics Program with OEM Aggregation. Presenting today is Phil and Matt, and let me tell you a little bit about them. Phil Robinson has been building and providing support for innovative software for the heavy civil construction industry for 14 years. As Principal Product Manager of Fleet Solutions for HCSSS, Phil leads multiple cross-functional teams that develop inventive hardware and software solutions. These solutions help thousands of fleet management professionals get the most out of their fleets, and he's with us here today. And also we have Matt. Since joining HCSSS in 2007, Matt has consulted and implemented hundreds of companies all over North America, sharing knowledge and improving processes with nearly every product in the HCSSS software suite. He loves the challenge of figuring out the best solution for each customer or situation, whether it is through software or streamlined processes. Matt regularly shares his knowledge and experience like he's doing today, and learning events in addition to working with customers and leading the consulting team. This webinar today is being recorded. A few housekeeping tips before we get started today. Please, attendees, mute your mic. If you have questions, please put them in the question box that you'll see on your screen. There will be a short time for Q&A at the end. And with that, I turn this over to Phil and Matt.
Thanks, Donna. Again, my name is Phil Robinson, and today we're going to be talking about how to transform your telematics program with OEM aggregation. Again, alongside me, I've got Matt Fiddler, one of our longtime senior consultants on the implementation side. So he's got a lot of perspective and experience with how customers just like yourselves and customers kind of all over the gradient of heavy civil construction contractors have implemented solutions like these to manage their fleets. So kicking it off here, we've covered who the speakers are. We'll leave this up here just for a second for the recording. And a couple of takeaways that that I want you guys to leave with today. So one, just understanding what OEM telematics is, what the and how the AEMP ISO standard kind of work to consolidate all that information into what we have today. We'll discuss some benefits and some use cases, and then talk about how the integration works with whatever platform you're using. A lot of this we'll use through the lens of our platform, but this should be pretty standard across most companies that aggregate OEM data. Okay. So what is OEM telematics? An OEM, original equipment manufacturer, telematics refers to the integrated systems installed on equipment during its manufacture. So that's going to be a combination of GPS, sensors, cellular connectivity that collects real-time data on your off-highway and on-highway equipment. There's a couple of things that you get out of that, namely remote monitoring, utilization tracking, maintenance alerts. All those are things that a lot of the OEs provide on their platforms. And kind of in the context of this conversation, we're going to be referring specifically to off-highway equipment manufacturers. Another thing to notice that today, most pieces of equipment come with some sort of factory installed telematics device. Okay, so what that looked like what that looked like when that first came out is we had a bunch of different OEMs coming out with their own telematics platforms, their own hardware, and their own data protocols, and which created a lot of really good information for fleet managers, but also introduced some kind of downstream problems and or challenges, I guess, that we see with a lot of new data-driven functions and features. There's a lot of fragmentation. So if you have a mixed fleet, 5 or 6 different manufacturers, you've got 5 or 6 different portals to log into to kind of evaluate that data, which can make it difficult to make business decisions on a mixed fleet if you're trying to allocate resources and track utilization of the fleet. So, or actually, let's, so the data flow of that, and then we'll get into kind of how the AEMP work through consolidating that information. So the data flow as it sits right now is going to be collected off of those sensors and GPS devices that I'd mentioned before. That's going to go through some sort of data connectivity, whether you pay for that or whether the dealer or the manufacturer includes that as a just an added a value add to that piece of equipment. There is some sort of data connectivity to get that information up to that OEM's data server or cloud. Okay. Somewhere up in the cloud, there's also a gateway that's going to send that information over the normalized AEMP standard to the end user application. Okay. So speaking of that standard, the AEMP, which is the Association of Equipment Management Professionals, created a standard. It kind of started back in 2010. The standard that's available today that everybody kind of knows about and that everybody is aligning towards is the 2016 version. And so working through or kind of acknowledging all of those burdens of compiling the OEM data across a mixed fleet, AEMP created the standard, and that standard has progressed from I believe we went through 1.2 version, we're on currently the 2.0 version, and then that was adopted into the ISO standard 15143-3. So if you're searching for, or if you're talking to your dealer about stuff like this, AEMP 2.0 or ISO 15143, those are kind of interchangeable. Those both refer to the same telematics data standard. All right, and so with that data standard, there's a set of normalized data that we can get off of that. So AEMP 2.0 consists of over 20 standardized data points. So I'll let you guys, I'm not going to read them to you, but there's some standardized fields here. This is not all of them, but these are some of the common ones that are implemented and that are really useful on the off-highway side. Namely, is going to be last known location and operating hours, primarily used to track utilization. Okay. So now that we've got kind of the setup for what the integration or what the AEMP standard is and what that data feed looks like, we can start talking about some of the benefit statements of integration and how that functionality works and what that could look like for you and some of the different business decisions that will unlock for you. All right.
So I'd say the really nice thing, nobody needs another username and password, and I'm sure you will have more than enough before getting all the GPS goodness, Cat Tier, Volvo, Komatsu, and everybody else's. So being able to take all that disparate data and pull it into one spot means you can look at your fleet in one spot, and you can set some expectations and thresholds for how much we're using everything. Whether I'm slicing that and I just want to look at my excavators or just my loaders or everything in general, I want to get at least 1,500 hours out of everything this year. It gives me an easy way to see that, but I can only really do that sort of KPI reporting if I have everything in one spot. If I got to log in and look at my CAT stuff and see how it's doing, log in and look at my Komatsu stuff and see how it's doing, it makes it more work than probably any of us are really interested in doing to figure out where our winners and losers are. So the ability to grab all that information and have it in one spot, whether it's our platform or somebody else's, that's really what having the standard helps unlock. So we can pull all that information and put it into one location with one login that you're normally logging into, and then if you really need to get into the details or what particular issues we're running into for a machine, or be able to see exactly where something is, because usually the passing information back and forth is throttled to typically once a day. So I might need to log into one of my individual websites to see exactly what's going on right this second. But for any sort of analysis or looking overall at what's going on, it gives you the ability to log into one spot, pull that together, and see what's going on. I'd say the other cool thing that we can do with the next slide, I think, Phil, is being able to have all that in one spot. Even if most of my excavators are Komatsus, I'm still probably going to have another couple that I found the right deal for, or it just made sense to pick them up. So again, even if I'm analyzing, which is a thing you can do, even if I'm analyzing a subset of my fleet, being able to have that all in one spot is really the magic that this allows you to do. You can pull all your meters into one spot as well, which makes it a lot easier to run your PM program. A lot of new equipment comes with that covered, and so they're going to be reaching out to me to schedule when they're coming out to do an oil change. But after that's over, and even keeping an eye on it myself, because I want to know if we're about to do some major work, that I'm not sending a machine that's going to need a PM next week. I want to know what's going on and have an idea of where that is. So again, if we have everything in one spot, it makes this easier to stay on top of everything, even if my mechanics aren't going to be the one that are performing that service. Which sets us up for the next slide, which is the really cool thing. If my mechanics are going to perform that service, they'll know where the heck they're going. So if you flip over to the next slide, Phil, I had a customer in Chicago that he looked real quick and said, oh, okay, I need to go to the south side of town. Drove down to work on an excavator that wasn't there, and then realized he was having some GPS issues and it hadn't pinged in a couple weeks. Made some phone calls, and it was like half a mile down the road from where he started. So he got to drive back through Chicago through traffic. So being able to have that all in one spot with access, not just to me as the fleet manager, but also to my fleet folks as well, sharing that information and spreading out that knowledge makes it a lot easier for us to make sure before I hop in my truck that I'm being as efficient as I can with my time, and I'm not spending it behind the wheel. I know where I'm going. I know when that thing last pinged. If I need to log into a separate website to double check, I can do that, but it makes it a heck of a lot easier to have that all in one spot and see that relatively recently I know what's going on. Ideally, that is also giving you access to some of the information you can see in our platform here on the screen, so I can see the fuel level and def level. I can see where we are in the PM schedule because we have that already organized. So being able to have access to that data, whether it's from your software providers, GPS units, or the OEM, should be pretty similar, at least for the core information that you're looking at.
Yep. And Matt, I did want to step back one slide real quick. One of the other key things that I wanted to kind of touch on here is from the utilization standpoint, is right now from a fleet management and a planning standpoint, having disparate systems makes it very difficult to plan. And a lot of times, Matt and I have seen where customers wind up renting something just because we didn't have, or they didn't have clear vision on what was actually available and where it was. And that's kind of another benefit of having that all under, you guys may have heard the industry term single pane of glass, basically looking at it from your cell phone or your tablet or your computer screen, being able to see all of my mixed fleet in one spot and knowing exactly where it's at, what the utilization is, and whether or not I need to rent a piece or I have a piece that, the operations is tucked off behind a berm or something because they don't want you to come pick it up. So there's a lot of benefit there. Just and like Matt said, whether it's a software provider unit or an OEM unit, those all for that functionality for us and a lot of our competition all function kind of that same way and give you that same overview.
I've had a lot of customers over the years talk about how, oh, I need that machine. Oh, I need that machine. You can't come borrow that. I'm going to use it later this week. Being able to say, let me check real quick. and see how much, if Phil's my foreman, see how much he's run it in the last week. He's saying it, but you turned it on for an hour and a half so far in the last week. Oh, I'm just about to use it. It's like, dude, I'm going to use it. I'm going to use it right now, and I'm going to use it more than an hour and a half. So being able to use that data and fact check anybody that's making it harder definitely can save you dollars and give you an easy way and insight into that information. And democratizing that data and giving more people access to see where everything is. I've had a lot of customers that have started doing that in more recent years. So now my operations team is able to see how much they're using it, and they can do some of their own horse trading and figure out, oh, okay, if you can get it back to me on Friday, then cool. Holler at the shop, tell them to pick it up, and you can borrow it. Lets them work it out a little bit more and tag team with your dispatcher, so it's not just relying on them to figure out where we can move those puzzle pieces around to maximize our efficiency.
Right. And one of the key pieces that we talked about earlier was, or that was on the screen earlier, is one of the standardized data points is fault codes and fuel. So from a fueling operation standpoint, being able to schedule that out, kind of know what your entire fleet is at and schedule those fueling operations at, because most people, most fuelers are going to hit every job on their route, but a lot of times you don't have to do that, or at least you can get a lot more intelligent about what pieces of equipment actually need to be touched. And also from a fault code side is knowing where or knowing what or severity for what's going on with those pieces of equipment, because oftentimes you'll get a light, the field will either call you about it and we'll down the piece of equipment and maybe we didn't have to, or they won't call you about it and they'll keep running it and they'll derate it. So either side of it's not good, and being able to have clear vision on that and kind of going back to that first use case we talked about with consistent KPI monitoring and alerting, being able to consolidate all those alerts into one spot so that you can see it doesn't matter what manufacturer it is or what device it is. I know if I get a fault code, I can get an alert on whatever device I want to get an alert on and make an appropriate business decision for that piece of equipment. And I think that's where we left off, Matt.
The meters are the easiest and most obvious thing of having that access to the GPS data. So whether it's an old machine and you're installing an aftermarket GPS or having an OEM unit feed that, having that feed one system where you can keep that up to date and know what services are coming due, that pays for itself. Everything else on top of that is gravy. Having an operator write down the meter reading so we can pass it on to the foreman, having the foreman write that down so she can pass that on and be able to get that information in the office, and hopefully that piece of paper makes it to my desk as a fleet manager, so I or somebody else can punch that into our spreadsheet or system and get it updated to say, well, shit, we were supposed to do an oil change last week. Get out there as fast as you can. Just the time and effort to get that information to your desk versus have the robot do it for you automatically every day, a few times a day if you need to, can pay for itself. And then knowing where it is and being able to have all that extra data is huge when you think about the cost and time being able to gather and collect that and keep it organized and not have to hunt down the handful of machines that aren't telematized. And oh, have we gotten the meter? No, it's been a couple weeks. I think it's on this job. Okay, call out to them, spend a couple minutes and a couple dollars, and then they can go and walk over to go pull it and climb on the machine and grab it, and then they can walk back and pass that on. It adds up real quick. The dollars you don't think about, the opportunity cost to be doing something a lot more useful than pulling numbers off a piece of equipment. Another particularly handy thing, I'd say usually the foremen I've worked with don't have too much of a problem knowing what piece of equipment they have on site and getting the right machine on their time card, but being able to compare what's on my time card to what was physically on site. Again, if it's all aggregated in one spot, you should have a geofence set up. in one system, so that way it knows what job site everything on that site is on, and I can compare that information to the time card, make sure that I'm not recording the wrong piece of equipment on my time card and having to go double check hours and move them to other machines and goofing up my utilization history. So it looks like I'm using the heck out of my lowest numbered excavator because that's at the top of the list and I picked that, versus my highest numbers excavators. I got to scroll down a little bit more and I didn't want to click down there and find it. So again, being able to make that easy, fact check and make sure the data we have is good is really, really handy and useful. And being able to share that information with the field, democratizing that data, like I mentioned before, this is something we actually just recently added to our field app, where now as I'm the foreman, I add a piece of equipment on my time card, I can see the fuel level. So that way, if I know we're getting a little low on a piece of equipment without having anybody tell me, I can look on my iPad, I can hit a button and be able to see that fuel level, def level, and see if I need to be making a call into the shop and say what's going on. If it is pinging an issue code, I can see what's going on. And if I know enough to be worried or not really worried about it, either way, I have that information and I can call it in if I need to pass that information on. The value of having the boots in the field, be able to have access to more information and know exactly what's going on with the fleet and then share that back to the shop. So we've got better communication and access to what's going on. Should save us a ton of time and a ton of back and forth.
I do think equally as important is making sure that you have the right asset on the time card, is making sure that we're doing the appropriate capture of hours. So I know from me and Matt, we work with fleet managers and shops, so we're kind of concerned with our concern, or their concerns are our concerns. So a big thing that comes up is making sure that we are capturing the appropriate number of hours on that piece, and that we're not just pencil whipping a time card 4 hours if I turn the key, and then 8 if it actually did some work. Now we're with aggregating that OEM data. Now we're able to tell you how many hours that piece of equipment actually ran and populate the time card appropriately, and so that we're able to tell that foreman that piece of equipment ran for 4 hours, it idled for 2 hours. You need to notate that on your time card as 6 hours with the account for that idle, and that way we're getting that cost capture on the job. So the job's getting charged for that piece of equipment correctly. Our internal charges are getting ran correctly back through the shop, and we're actually getting clear vision and getting consistent vision across the organization on how our fleet is being utilized.
I had one customer in Ohio that had an exceptional process in keeping track of this, where they'd compare the meter hours from all other systems that were telematized to the hours we recorded on the time card each week. And basically they gave you I think it was a couple hour delta. So as long as you were within a couple hours for the week, they said that's fine. And anything that was more than a couple hour delta, they sent back to the foreman and basically said, hey, you've got greater than 2 hours. Here's what your hours should have been. I need you to tell me what the hours are going to be. And you have until Monday at noon or something like that, because they were reviewing this every week. And then any hours that did not get corrected, then the shop had worked with the accounting and operations team to set up an unallocated equipment cost. So I'm going to charge your job for it. It's going to go into a miscellaneous bucket on your job. And at the end of the job, you can either say you spent 50 grand in this miscellaneous bucket, which you don't really want, or it's more work for operations to go and move those dollars to the right spot. So it was a good way to be a good parent that, hey, I found an issue. I need you to go and clean your room. I need you to go and fix it up. But if you don't, then I'm going to clean it up, but you're not going to like where I put everything away. And you get to go put your toys back in the bins you want them to be in. So it was a really, really clever and good way to engineer a solution to making sure that the utilized hours, the hours they charged themselves for each machine matched up with the meter reading. So they were pretty darn close, no matter where the machine was, even if it was hopping from job to job that week.
So those are, we wanted to bring up a kind of a handful of use cases and how having having consistent data across a mixed fleet can benefit you. Kind of the last couple of things that I want to talk through are a setup and what that typically looks like, and some things to keep in mind, and then we'll pop into Q&A. So from a setup standpoint, this should be with the vast majority of aggregating applications now, any of the other guys out there. It should be very easy to actually set that stuff up on the platform. In my experience, the most difficult, or I don't know if difficult's the right word, I think the most time-consuming part is getting that information back from your dealer network. Some dealers make that very easy, or some OEMs make that very easy. They have dedicated personnel at the dealerships that handle that stuff, and it's as easy as calling and saying, hey, I need my AEMP API credentials, and they give you your credentials and you plug them into a website and hit activate, and that's basically it. And there are some OEMs that have to do a little bit more work on the back end to get you those. But at the end of the day, essentially what it is working with your dealer to get those credentials and then plugging those into whatever aggregation platform you're using. All of them have different activation styles and monetization schedules. And so check with whoever your platform provider is on that, but that part of it should be pretty easy. The standard kind of lends itself to being easy to set up. Okay. And a couple of things to keep in mind, and these are things that just come up a lot from customers and prospects, is that the AEMP 2.0 standard, it only standardizes the technical format of the data. It doesn't mandate that the providers have to have specific fields in there. So you can have 5 or 6 fields as long as they follow the stipulated format, they're still compliant. And that's something that we're seeing more and more of that kind of go away. We're seeing a lot more OEMs offer a lot more of the data points, but we have had kind of, as we've seen the standard grow and proliferate through the OEMs, we have seen kind of a disparity. When it first started out, we'd have OEMs that would give us a handful, maybe 10 data points. And then we've had some OEMs that we work very closely with that give us a lot of data and actually give us more than the standard calls for. So we have even better data fidelity. So that's just kind of one thing to keep in mind, that it's not really a silver bullet for every single OEM. It's really going to vary depending on the OEM. Some of them, again, the data points vary. Also, the cadence or the frequency with which the data is updated varies. Some providers or some OEMs update once a day. Some OEMs update once a minute. And so it really kind of just depends. And that's something that your dealer can educate you on as to how often, one, your hardware that's installed on that piece of equipment is going to update, and two, how often the API will update that information, because those two are not necessarily tied together. It's at the OEM's discretion. Okay. So again, we talked about the second one here just a second ago, that ping frequency can fluctuate. And then the second thing is, aggregating OEM data is a really cost-effective way to one, have a modern mixed fleet, and two, have all that data kind of consistent. Some OEMs give you, again, it's a value add that's free. Some of them make you pay for it, and so there's kind of an evaluation that you'll have to do once you get to the end of that term, whether that's you want to re-up with the OEM and continue aggregation, or you want to seek out first-party hardware from whoever your aggregation platform is. We offer our own hardware in addition to aggregating OEM devices. Many other people in our space do the same thing, and so that's really kind of a pro and con that you'll have to do when it comes to renewal of that telematics device.
I have quite a few customers that basically run the OEM until their initial purchase expires, and then they slap on one of our units, or I've talked with other people that slap on a different unit. So I basically use the OEM for as good as they're going to give it to me with the purchase, and then I switch to a third-party device after that. If you back up one more slide, I'd say one big takeaway from this presentation, I hope, is that number 2 here is just working with your dealer. You need the API credentials. So it is very rare that your normal login that you use for you as a human to log in is the same as the robot login that this API connection is going to use. So getting that API connection is really the magic to be able to hook it up to a aggregator system.
Great. All right, and I believe that is it for the content. Donna, if we have any questions, we can go ahead and take care of those now.
Yes, we have a few questions to answer. We have a question: can you use this with heavy job, Fueler Plus, and dispatch?
Yeah, so that's probably an HCSS customer. Yeah, so you can any of the OEM data that comes into our platform gets normalized, and honestly, from the front end, you can't tell that it's not one of our hardware devices. It can be used across the platform. So once it's in HCSSS Telematics, it gets spit out to Heavy Job, Dispatcher, Fueler Plus, Equipment 360, anything with that asset ID in it can leverage the telematics data that comes from the OEMs.
Wonderful. We have another question here asking if it's true that by the end of August that HCSSS will have availability in telematics to compare telematic hours versus heavy job hours.
The end of August might be a little ambitious, but it will be there. It will be there this year.
Wonderful. And another question that's coming through: can you use this with marine equipment, tugboats, and cranes?
Cranes, yes. So we have. Well, the short answer is yes. And the long answer is it kind of depends. So if your provider, whether it's the marine manufacturer or the powertrain manufacturer for that marine equipment, has an API interface, you can pull that data and put it anywhere you want. And if your platform provider can also do that as well. So it's that's kind of a long-winded way of saying maybe. For cranes, it's a lot more cut and dry because they're typically that's a more typical piece of equipment on a job site. So like I know for us, we integrate with a lot of or with several OEM crane providers, and I know a lot of the other companies in our space do as well.
Excellent. And another question from a attendee wants to know if you've heard from any end users that have experienced maybe a not so good experience with the CAT ISO changeover.
I have had I've heard there's some growing pains with kind of moving that stuff over, and I think that's not necessarily super unexpected, because I think that there's some context to be I guess to look at it with a little bit of context, in that their core business is manufacturing off-highway construction equipment, and kind of software is kind of a value add or a secondary thing. And there's always going to be growing pains. I mean, software is what we do every day, and there are growing pains with rolling out new functionality and new features. And I think that that's kind of consistent with what we've seen with a lot of OEMs. Anytime you do a major deployment and a major upgrade to technology, there's always going to be some growing pains. So yeah, we've seen some. CAT has been really collaborative, and I talk to my counterpart there fairly regularly, and we worked through some of the challenges that have come up and dealt with those pretty quickly.
Great, thank you. We do have another question for you. Is there any expansion plans for API feeds fetched from rental companies such as United and Sunbelt?
I know on our end, that's something that we're investigating. In general, I couldn't speak to that, but that is something that we are looking at.
It's a good way to sort of frame APIs, which we've been talking about. But to oversimplify it, I think of it as making like an electrical plug. So the API is, this is the spec of the electrical plug. It's looked the same as at least everybody in the States. It's got a fat blade and a little blade and a hole, and I'm going to put 120 volts through it. So that's my part of the API if I'm the OEM manufacturer. Now, if you're going to connect, or when HCSSS connects it up, we have to build a plug that plugs in there. So just because they have the receptacle for us, there's still work involved in hooking everything up to oversimplify. And so that's the way I kind of think of it, as a good analogy to give you an idea. It's like, oh, well, they say I have an API, it should be easy. It's, well, we got to make a cord to go in there from scratch and make sure that everything matches up and that we don't have anything flipped up the wrong way and get that data going in the wrong spot. And so being able to have that receptacle is great. That's a big step. If you don't have that, then it makes it a whole lot harder. So here we're going to use a standard plug. Great. Now somebody's got to build a connector and maintain that connector to keep it going.
All right, thank you very much. I don't see any more questions in the queue. So I want to thank you, Phil and Matt, for your time today. Thank you for attending this webinar. Hope you found all the information useful. That will conclude our time today, and have a great afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.